1970s, my husband and I have moved in the last 3 years to rural Arkansas, where we live deep in the woods on a mountainside near the Arkansas River. And outside of ufology, which for me is anything but a hobby, I do have other interests and activities. I love visiting with my grandchild. I study the usefulness of the wild plants that grow on the mountainside where we live. I have a great deal of fun playing with my chihuahuas, and I enjoy the music and the concerts of Bruce Springsteen. So I do have some other interests here. Old hippies never give up their hobbies, you know. I quit teaching college in 1991, and since then have devoted, as was mentioned earlier, all of my efforts to abduction research, beginning first in conjunction with Barbara Barthlick when I was in Texas, looking into reports in the Texas-Oklahoma area, and then later independently, researching cases around the country. My most recent work is reported in the new book, Taken, that was referred to also earlier, that was published this past April by Keltworks. And I hope we will, by the time I'm through talking, understand all of the connotations that I imply with the title, Taken. It is not just the abduction aspect that I'm talking about. As both an abductee and a researcher into other people's experiences, I feel that I have a somewhat expanded context or knowledge of this phenomenon. My own experiences have taught me many things about the nature of alien activity, but that insight has been greatly expanded by the context of so many other reports I've been able to study, and it has helped me to see well beyond the limits of the individual experience. If we judge the entire phenomenon only by our personal experiences, we're going to get a very distorted view. The context, the patterns, the unique elements as well as the similar elements are all very important for us to have a chance of a glimmer of understanding what may be behind this phenomenon. Yet even having been through these things, lived with people who've been through these things, and studied literally hundreds of personal and first-hand reports about these activities, I know very little about the alien agenda behind this activity. Stanton mentioned the need to hold ourselves to facts in this field, and I think that is extremely important. We should repeat that 10 times a day as we go through the work in this area. The problem, of course, with the abduction phenomena, as with a lot of ufology, is that the nature of the alien activity is designed deliberately to keep us from having much in the way of concrete evidence. Designed that way. It is not an accident. So it is difficult to feel confident of many facts. The dictionary defines facts as things and ideas which are demonstrably existent, objectively verified, and known to be certain. And at this point, given everything I've learned internally and from external evidence, there are so very few things I'm willing to call facts. The list is very short. So today, instead of regaling or educating or entertaining you with abduction case reports and photos of the body markings and the drawings of the spacecraft and aliens, which I have done and could do, I would prefer to take this opportunity of perspective, which is, of course, the theme of this MUFON symposium, to share with you my list of facts, and then try to take you beyond the fringe of this phenomenon and into the heart of the abduction scenario. Now, I'm going to begin by discussing my list of facts before I go on to two other issues, propaganda and fantasy, because I think it's on the basis of the facts that I have been able to discern what I can about the data in the other two categories. So this will be a very short list. I hope you'll follow along with me. Facts. Fact number 1. We do not know with any certainty exactly what these entities may be. Extraterrestrial, interdimensional, terrestrial in origin, some combination of all of the above, something we have yet to even dream of. I'm going to use the term alien merely for convenience, and I am not implying that I believe they are from another planet. Now, certainly they may well be. We just don't know, and that's a fact. The aliens themselves have identified a number of different origins to various abductees and contactees throughout the years. But of course, we humans have absolutely no way to check out any of the statements that they've made. Therefore, we cannot know these things, as the dictionary says about facts, to be certain, to be objectively verifiable. Fact number 2, and I'm stating this with all of the tact and diplomacy and self-control that I can, and those of you who know me know I have very little. At least some of the aliens are liars. Through the past decades, the aliens have made, and you all know this if you're familiar with your ufology history, have made various predictions and promises and given a number of very specific warnings about impending events. And we have these documented at least since the early 1950s. And you and I all know, when we look at the record of what's happened since then, that very few of these things, and none of great consequence, have come to pass. This is not a reliable source. I would like to illustrate just from personal experience one such scenario that should make us question the things we are told by these creatures. In Into the Fringe, I recount the story of a young man that I had known since he was 11 years old. He and my son grew up together. His family and I were close friends, and I have a great deal of confidence in who this person is and his personal integrity. He went through an intense series of encounters and abductions, as we all were doing in this particular group during 1987 and 88 and 89. And one of the entities with whom he had repeated, almost regular contact was an entity who described itself as an interdimensional being, stating that its group was 10th dimensional and knew about the 11th, the way we know about the 4th dimension. This entity would appear in various physical guises during its encounters with James. Sometimes it would be a nebulous form. Sometimes it would be a human-looking woman, but sometimes only her head. Sometimes her head and her hands if there was something she wanted to show him. So it varied. At one point in an extraordinary weekend of events, which are recorded in detail in Fringe, James was compelled to go out of state to a particular area. He was at his grandparents' house and was abducted in the middle of the night and taken to a hill a few miles from there where this woman materialized in full form this time. All the body parts were there. At that time, she told him that within 5 years of that date, he and a few other people, including us and several others in the area, would be activated to perform our jobs, our tasks. That it didn't matter where we would be at that time, it didn't matter what we were doing or what we wanted, we would do our jobs. The woman told him he would know this was true because she was going to give him a series of predictions of events that would come to pass from this date through the 5-year period. And she began by telling him about a situation that was occurring right that moment several states away with people he knew, so he could check this out to see if it was true. He certainly did. We all checked it out, and it was exactly true. What the woman had told him going on in the other states actually had happened, was verifiable. Of course, this made of James a believer. James was a valedictorian in a private prestigious school. He had a career ahead of him where the sky literally could have been the limit. But the woman had told him in 5 years, you will be turned on to do your job. It doesn't matter what you're doing or where you are. And you will know this is true by the things that occur. The first thing made such an impression that she was telling the truth that James's life was put completely on hold. He dropped out of college, he gave up his plans for a career, his personal relationships became irrelevant, and he thought, I've only got 5 years, I should party, I'll make enough delivering pizza on a part-time basis that I can do the things I need to do before they take me over. Of course, none of the rest of the events occurred, but his life was effectively altered to his detriment by the lies that he had been led to believe. And you know, the best way to get someone to believe a lie is to sandwich it between a few truths, which is what, of course, the woman did. The 5 years, by the way, ended in August of 1993, and we're all still doing what we want, where we want, and we're not doing our alien jobs. The aliens have given a number of stories to people throughout the years about who they are, where they're from, and we have a list, if you compile this, and at one point I think I tried to, a list of planet origins for these beings that include everything from the planet Lanakane to Banlon. They also have given us a variety of explanations as to why they're here and why they perform certain procedures. Often, however, these explanations are contradictory. And without going into a great deal of detail, I will point out just one example. I report on this in the book Taken. Several people, abductees, that I have personally worked with, have been shown cloned bodies aboard craft or in facilities. And we'll talk a little bit more about the details of these in a moment. Just for purposes of the deception and the lying capability, I will use this little story. Pat, who's one of the cases in my book, was shown a copy of her body that was in storage with a number of other human bodies. She was told it was for the resurrection. And now if you know your Bibles, you know when the resurrection comes, we will all get new bodies. Pat was raised in a very simple Christian fundamentalist background. The aliens, throughout their encounters with Pat and her family, had used the religious symbolism to bond with the family and to instill confidence in them. They'd even had Jesus beam into the room at one point when the Greys were abducting the grandmother and say, "It's okay, they're with me." Pat was told that this body, this cloned copy, would be her new body for the resurrection, and this was extremely moving and religious for this woman. However, another woman, also reported on in the book, was shown a copy of her new body in an entirely different scenario, of course, and was told, in fact, if she didn't cooperate with the agenda the aliens had picked out for her, she could be replaced with that body and nobody'd ever notice the difference. And in a third case, we actually had that occur on a temporary basis. A woman was abducted on her way to work and shown on a viewing screen her clone going to work in her place, and nobody knew the difference. So, are these bodies for the resurrection, blessed by God Himself, or are they threatened potential replacements? Aliens didn't get their stories quite straight in those cases. Fact number 3. In encounters, the human's perceptions are controlled, as are the human's conscious memories. Now, you already are very familiar, probably from the work of Hopkins and Jacobs and others, with the concept of screen memories, especially at the onset or at the conclusion of an abduction event, right? Someone may see a strange owl instead of the ET, or a little gray rabbit by the side of the car instead of an ET, or a beautiful deer, whatever. We're familiar with these screen events. What we may not be familiar with is the fact that the screen techniques go well beyond such temporary uses in the phenomenon. And we'll talk about that a little more later also. We're talking about control in fact number 3. It's also a fact that the perception of pain can be controlled and is controlled during these encounters with the particular abductees, as are feelings of physical pleasure, often sexual pleasure. And, of course, the human's emotions are also controlled during these encounters. The fact is, you are in control of these creatures during every encounter, to some degree, more or less, normally more. Fact number 4, false memories can overlay and disguise the actual events of an encounter. And even with regressive hypnosis, the abductee may recall false scenarios. I'm not talking false memory syndrome, as so much has been ballyhooed lately in the press. That's not what I'm talking about. The abductee can recall false scenarios, even under regressive hypnosis, unless some effective method is used in the hypnotic process to help the abductee bypass implanted illusions. Some of you have heard me talk before. Remember an illustration of this concerning a woman named Joy, who in the 1970s had an encounter, a missing time and relocation episode in California. Was driving in one town, 2 hours later, she's in another town, has no idea how she's gotten there. She's crying, she's in hysterics, and she feels totally abandoned and betrayed. 20 years later, when additional incidents occurred and finally compelled Joy to seek out some help to find out what was going on in her life, one of the events that she looked at under hypnosis was this 2 hours of missing time in the early 70s. She recalled in the initial stage that she was taken aboard a craft and brought by a regal and awe-inspiring figure who looked like the king and had on the robe and was very much in charge, into a room much like this, stood before a podium much like this, gazed out into an audience of wonderful smiling little grays, not at all like this, thank God, and was given a book and told to read this book to the audience. She looked at the book, and it had blue symbols or figures on it that she had never seen, and she said, I can't read this. I don't know what these symbols mean. And she was told, just put your hand over each symbol. You'll receive the impression, and then recite what you received to the audience. So Joy did this, and she would touch each symbol, and as she did, she would mentally receive a very warm, uplifting, wonderful spiritual message, which she would then recite to her audience. And she went through doing this, said the response she got was one of such love, such overwhelming acceptance. She was really awestruck by the experience. When the hypnotist asked her to move forward, there was a jump, a gap in her story, and suddenly she's back in the car, crying, hysterical, and feeling very abandoned and betrayed. Now, as you know, that doesn't match up. There's a discrepancy between the emotional state she was in the car and this wonderful, awe-inspiring spiritual experience she had recalled. I think you'll agree they don't match up. The hypnotist noticed this, noticed the gap, and asked Joy to first program her mental computer to perceive only the truth. And second, to back up to maybe 5 or 10 minutes before she was in the car. When she did, Joy found herself in an extraordinarily different situation. She wasn't reading a book to a loving and warm audience. She was naked, suspended in a beam or tube of light, being poked and prodded by a group of aliens who were using her much as a biological chart to explain, as we might to students, this is what this part does, this is what that is. And then she was put on a table, tilted at an angle, and was forced to endure some sexual intrusions. At this point, Joy, who could not move or talk, was mentally screaming to God and to Jesus, with whom she had very great faith, to help her, to save her, to make this stop. And when it didn't, and when she went through this for an extended period of time before being returned to her car, Joy came back a changed person. Abandoned and betrayed, she felt, by her God. Although she had no conscious memory of this event immediately upon her return, it changed everything in her life for 20 years. Her religion, her sexual orientation, everything about the woman. But without having the programming and help under hypnosis to see past illusion and perceive only the truth, Joy would have been one of those persons telling you how wonderful it was to be with the great alien brothers. She would have never known why the trauma and the after effects she carried for 20 years existed. Fact number 4 on my list is fact number 5. Given all that I've said so far, it is effectively a fact that abductees like myself and so many of you, while we report our experiences honestly and sincerely, we are really reporting alien-controlled information to the research community. As abductees, our situation is this: we can see the aliens, but we can't believe them. And we can't believe what we see them do. And I know this from personal experience as well as from a number of other investigated situations with very honest, very sincere people who are telling you, just as I have told and others have told you, what we honestly perceived as happening. We're being honest, but the illusions and false memories and distortions and controlled perceptions and emotions and responses that we had do not accurately reflect always what we really went through. Fact number 6, there's a serious element of human involvement in the abduction phenomenon, in addition, of course, to the very real alien participation. You all know, of course, about many abductees' reports of being monitored, harassed by human agents of some sort, cases of phone intervention, mail intervention, helicopter surveillance, etc. And I wish I had an hour just to talk about the human side of this phenomenon, which of course I don't. Now, in Into the Fringe, for instance, I did report about my husband's abduction and interrogation and threats by the military group in 1988. Similar, at the time, I had never heard of such a thing, and I found it even more disturbing than the alien encounters. Similar reports, though, have been made by a number of other abductees, some of whom I'm sure you're familiar with, such as Leah Haley's case, Alicia Davison in California, and some of you may be surprised to know Debbie Jordan. And part of her experiences reported a very similar human abduction and interrogation. It just never quite made it into print for some reason. In Taken, there are 4 more accounts of women whose lives have been intruded upon by what seems to be military human forces. And although I'm not at liberty, as so many of us aren't in this field where confidentiality is everything, to present to you the hard evidence that we have been able to gather in some of these cases, I am convinced by the evidence that we do have in a number of these cases, it's not an alien illusion of military. We've got names, dates, places, bases. It's real. Fact number 7. Whatever else it may be, the abduction agenda involves quite physical aims and procedures that tend to belie the idea of a primarily spiritual motivation on the alien's part. And much of what we see in these procedures goes well beyond the alleged aim of a crossbreeding program. If you think the aliens are only interested in making hybrid babies, then I invite you to figure out what these following procedures have to do with the process. First, you're aware of the various types of implants into numerous areas of the body, into the brain, through the ear, into the neck, into the spine, into the legs, the hips, and even in one man's fairly notable case, into the penis. Some of these implants have been seen on X-ray, CAT scan, and MRI. Some of them never show up. Some have been physically recovered. But so far as I'm aware today, and I do invite those who may know better to please correct me on this, whatever analysis has been performed on these objects has not given us any sensational new information. We still don't have any proof of what these things do in our bodies. What about the insertion of wires and tubes into abductees in the chest, in the kidneys, the ovaries, the wrists, the knees, and the feet, as well as the taking of human body fluids and the injection of unknown substances into the body in various locations? What about the brain operations, which in the statistics that I've been able to look at in a very general way without running them through the computer, seem to turn up as often, almost as often at least, as the reported taking of sperm and ova? In the cases reported, the individuals who've undergone or think they've undergone, because you always have to have that in the back of your mind, give an illusion, who have undergone these experiences use almost identical terms in reporting what has happened to them. I felt like my head was opened up and my brain was taken out. What about the deliberate pain experiments meant to produce levels of pain in the abductees, apparently for the measurement, study, or pleasure of the aliens who are observing them? I reported on one of these with James in Into the Fringe. He was put through an extraordinarily torturous and traumatic experience, having holes drilled in a row through the top of his head. He received an apology for this. Sorry, but we had to do it. But no explanation for why he had to do it. And most people are not given an explanation. What about the other bizarre tests and procedures that are reported time and time again? Abductees immersed in water or some liquid in which they're then forced to breathe the liquid. I think Hopkins and Jacobs have made this fairly well known to you. They now include it as one of the standard procedures. What does this have to do with crossbreeding? are being forced to eat or drink unknown substances that then produce a variety of after effects on the abductees. Angie, reported on and taken, was given a bitter red liquid to drink, passed out immediately, and came to in a very passive, hypnotic state in which she then went through an interrogation with a number of people. Ted Rice, another case that I've been working on for a couple of years, as a child was given a pill to eat or swallow that then produced on the 10-year-old boy the effects of an aphrodisiac. What about being forced to engage in a variety of sexual, not reproductive, but sexual situations with alien beings, with human-looking figures, and with other abductees? Frequently, the alien sexual activities are reported to be carried out by reptoid-looking beings, but not always. We've got reports of gray sex, hybrid sex, and Nordic sex, among others. And as Justice in one of Hopkins recently reported scenarios, I think it was on television last year on sightings, I described and taken how Lisa, one of the abductees reported on here, was forced to have sex with another abductee in one of her encounters. It was an extremely poignant situation after the fact. The man told her, apologized to her, told her how sorry he was that he was being forced to do this to her. He said, "They've been taking me since childhood. I don't know how to stop it." And he gave her his full name. That's all he had in his control to do. What about the cloning? I mentioned this earlier. And I'm not talking about just the potential and I think very evidentially supported idea that the little gray workers you're also familiar with, like the little guy down here on the floor, are cloned, produced, manufactured like, we do Fords, Chevys. Not just this kind of cloning of the same sort of creatures to go out and do the work, but also the cloning of human bodies, which, as I said, have been shown to abductees. Sometimes they match and are identical to the human in the situation. Sometimes they're just a bunch of identical bodies, inert, adult bodies. In one case, a man was taken to a facility in which he saw a room in which there were about 40 inert human bodies, 20 male, 20 female. The males were all identical to each other. The females were identical to each other, and they were beautiful, blonde, healthy specimens. What do these things have to do, is what I've asked you to think about, with the crossbreeding agenda? Fact number 8. All of the things that I've described to you so far are part of the aliens' physical aims and procedures. But that isn't all there is to their motivations. The agenda also involves the long-term psychological programming of the abductee. It targets, among other concepts, our social and personal relationships, our sexuality, our political ideas, and our religious and spiritual concerns. For instance, many of us, through our experiences, and I think I could get a show of hands on this, are made to be highly suspicious of our government. Now, perhaps with good reason. And in general, we become less trusting and intimate with people outside of this field, and very paranoid often of people within this field. As one of the women in the book, Jane, in Taken, has said, the aliens had fostered in her mind a mistrust of the government. Certainly it has changed most abductees' spiritual concerns and social agenda. With Pat, also reported on and taken, the aliens, as I mentioned earlier, used a religious approach in their contacts with her, telling her very early on that they were angels, but, as they said, not as you've been taught. And they even had Jesus, as I said, appear in her bedroom to give us okay for a subsequent multiple family abduction event that occurred that night. Pat told me about this as her brother and sister, who also remembered the event, and said that Jesus had blonde hair and blue eyes and was very beautiful and wonderful. And I pointed out that this is physically inconsistent with the historical Jesus that we know about from the Bible. He certainly probably didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes, and Pat could only say, well, this one did. On socio-political terms, abductees often find themselves obsessively interested in ecology, animal rights, globalism, but I've yet to see the really hard evidence, other than the ecological side of this, that this is a result of alien programming are a response, a human response to our own experiences, which tend, when one goes through trauma, to make one much more empathetic to others going through trauma. On more personal terms, abductees often go through specifically sexual obsessions, dysfunction, and compulsions. Now, because of the personal nature of sexual situations, I'm sure that so many of these reports I wish we had available to us are not well known in the abduction data body, such as other things like sperm gathering, ova gathering, fetal extractions, baby presentations, and so on. Now, I know those two are very intimate and very personal scenarios, but it seems that we humans are even more sensitive about our sexuality. And if you've ever known someone who's had a sexual assault, no matter how traumatic, unwelcome, intrusive, and criminal the event may have been, the person tends to carry, without a lot of help to get over it, a sense of shame and responsibility. This is also true for abductees. In private, although these reports are not often made public, in private, abductees have reported not only straightforward sexual encounters during abductions, as I mentioned earlier, but also the aftermath of such encounters on their lives. You might be surprised, and again you might not be, to know how many abductees report obsessions or compulsive masturbation after their experiences that they do not have control over. Overwhelming sexual appetites. Conversely, the loss of all sexual appetite or the fear of sex, as well as sexual obsessions with people the abductees normally would never be attracted to. Fact number 9. With their advanced technology, the aliens can create virtual reality scenarios that are usually absolutely real to the perceptions of the targeted abductee. Now, such capabilities have often been theorized and hypothesized and discussed in this field, but for me, they were confirmed in an extraordinary case, multiple case, that I have helped research for the last couple of years, involving an abductee named Ted Rice. This is the one story I do intend to tell in detail before going on. In the early 1990s, Ted was in Florida visiting an old friend named Marie, and she had also invited a third friend, a woman named Frances, as a house guest. Ted was in one room. Marie and Frances went to bed in twin beds in the other room. Shortly after going to bed, Ted heard his hostess Marie screaming, "Ted, come here quick." And he hopped up out of bed, ran down the hallway, and as he approached the other bedroom, he could see a blue glow coming through the open bedroom doorway. When he walked inside, he saw a very strange situation. His host, Marie, was pinned as far away, up against the wall, as far away from the bed area as she could, staring fixed at one of the twin beds in which Frances was still lying. The bed was surrounded by a large, spherical, blue energy field of some sort through which little lights seemed to dart and move. Frances was raised in a slightly raised position just as she had been starting to sit up in the bed and had been paralyzed in that position. Ted and Marie yelled at her, "Are you in pain? Can we help you? What's wrong?" She could barely hear them, and when she did answer them, they could barely hear her, and this is in a small bedroom. She, for several minutes, they observed, was carrying on a conversation with the ceiling. And then a few minutes later, she was carrying on a conversation with the foot of her bed. A few more minutes passed, and the sphere of electrical energy disappeared, and Frances was able to move again. When she sat up, she told them what she had been experiencing. It had begun, she said, hearing the sound of a helicopter low over the house, and in fact she had turned to her hostess, Marie, and said, "What's a helicopter doing over the house this low, this time of night?" Marie said, "What helicopter? I don't hear anything. You're dreaming. Go back to sleep." Frances said, "No, don't you hear that helicopter?" At that point, she had started to sit up. That's when the blue sphere of energy had coalesced around the bed. Francis told them after this was over that it had seemed as if the ceiling dissolved or disappeared, and I've heard this over and over and over again, and she could see through the ceiling up to the trees above the house where there was a strange craft. She had thought it was a copter when she heard the sound, but as she looked up, it was not like any copter she had ever seen. And within this were two alien creatures, which she described in physical detail, with which she carried on a conversation for several minutes. And then she said they came out of the craft and beamed down to the foot of the bed. Didn't you see them? And where she carried on another few minutes of conversation. When the sphere disappeared, so did the aliens, so did the invisible ceiling, and so did the strange craft. Frances had not been able to see the blue sphere of light around the bed. All she had seen was a craft, heard noises, had a conversation with two alien entities. Marie and Ted, who were outside of this field watching this, saw and heard only the blue sphere. If they had not been in the room to observe this, Frances would have believed with all sincerity that she had had exactly the encounter she thought she had, but she didn't. Fact number 10, and this is the last on my short list of facts. It is a fact that the aliens show a mysterious interest in the human soul. And I say mysterious because of the kinds of things they do and say concerning it. Now, this part of the phenomenon is so rarely discussed in public that I don't think we really have a good pool of data to proceed on a serious discussion, but I'd like to bring it up because it is a fact that the interest is there and mysterious, and we should be concerned about it. There are a number of intriguing reports that we could start with. For instance, a young girl who the aliens asked if they could borrow her soul. Two different abductees, totally different, totally isolated from each other. It happened to both come from the St. Louis area, both shown at the age of 5, a gigantic metallic spherical object somewhere in space, and we're told in essence it was the Soul Recycling Center. Reports of abductees who recall apparent past lives in which they've inhabited alien bodies with their souls. And even in one case, a man who watched as his young body was killed and his soul energy released, captured in a container, and taken to a new replacement body where it was reintroduced into the body through the technology of the little black box you might have heard about in some of these cases. For me, that's the end of my list of facts. So I'd like to move on to the other two categories, beginning with propaganda. Propaganda is defined as any association, system, or concerted movement for the propagation of a particular doctrine or belief. With me on that. What I've learned from my own experiences and the research into this field with others shows me that the aliens are clearly practicing such programming. And they are propagating a number of beliefs within abductees and through their reports to the UFO community specifically, and then to the population in general. They shape our beliefs in part, at least our beliefs about them in part, by the physical appearances they appear to us, for one thing. And through the virtual reality capabilities that I just described to you, they can and do give us any illusion they choose during abduction scenarios. One young man, a young boy abducted with his grandmother in a situation I don't need to go into at this time, had brought into the room the grandfather. It just happened the grandfather had been dead for 6 years. Another case in which, many cases in which celebrities or well-known figures are used to, in a scenario, to persuade an abductee to participate in this or that other procedure. Jesus turns up very, very often, and he's always blue-eyed and blonde hair, and I'm sure that doesn't, maybe if we were in India we'd get Krishna, I'm not sure. Masking entities when the illusions have been seen through, and they often are. And one I think particularly important, although I've cited it before, I think it's worth repeating. I tell the entire account and Into the Fringe. A young man who was compelled to go out of his house in the middle of the night as we, under control, you go where you're supposed to go, and there is some evidence. We get up and take ourselves out to be abducted, whether we know it or not. Compelled to go outside for an encounter, and there, waiting for him, was a Nordic, a beautiful blonde woman, probably the spitting image of Semyazi, who was waiting with open arms and a loving look, a little bit attractive, alluring look, in fact, for him to come into her arms. And he reached out, she reached out for him and drew him towards her, and being under control, as we always are, he went for it. Expecting to get an embrace and a kiss, as the arms wrapped around him, the image of Semyazi disappeared. And what was holding him was not blonde, beautiful, or human. And what he got was not a kiss, but being thrown to the ground, pinned down, with claw marks the next day around his neck where this had been held down, while a 2-foot rod of some sort was rammed down his mouth, down his throat, and into his stomach, where the extraction of juices then took place, leaving him with the external claw marks, the scraped throat, and the taste of bile for quite a while afterwards. The aliens foster a belief, I think, in their beauty and their compassion with us through such means as showing us pretty people. I think they realize we're not as smart as we think we are, and that we often equate beauty with goodness, and you and I both know that's not always the case. They also foster a belief in the alien-human crossbreeding scenario through such repeated procedures as fetal implants and extraction, sperm and ova gathering, baby presentations, and so on. But I think, as Stanton warned us early on, we should remember that without external confirming evidence, we cannot accept this as proof. If we believe the aliens in our race can interbreed, however, it serves a lot of propaganda purposes. It makes us think we have some shared commonality, which makes us more receptive to their presence and activities. If we think we share offspring with them, this belief binds us to them even more so, just as royal marriages used to try to bind competing political parties when one wanted control over the other. The crossbreeding scenario also can lead us to see ourselves as subordinate to the aliens and dependent upon them when they tell us this is the only way your race is going to be able to survive. And they reinforce our dependence on them by warning us of the impending disasters from which only they can save us. I wish I had time to discuss what they may really be doing with the sperm and ova and fetal material they take from us, but I have yet to see confirmed proof that it has anything to do with hybridizing either their species or ours. Through the manipulation of what we think they're doing and what they tell us, they also propagate the belief that their intrusions are ultimately beneficial in purpose, in spite of the fact that so much of the specific abduction events are painful, traumatic, and debasing to the person involved. We have many well-known accounts, abduction accounts, or should I say contact accounts, in which a person has been given a very positive, spiritual experience, sometimes with physical healing or expanded intelligence, psychic abilities, and these abductees feel very compelled to go out and tell you about their situations and proclaim that the spiritual benevolence of the aliens is all there is to it. And such reports can almost make you forget about the...
Oh, it all lined up for me.
Early on, Marshall Applewhite and his co-leader Bonnie Nettles had convinced themselves and their followers that they were God's emissaries, here to lead humanity out of a corrupt world. Applewhite said he and Nettles had come from outer space, taking on human bodies as camouflage. They offered salvation to members who could overcome their attachment to human desires such as sex, money, and drugs. Where did this desperate and bizarre mixture of sci-fi and millennial madness begin? Before Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Lou Nettles became so-called alien agents, they were living separate lives of quiet desperation. Their twisted partnership began some 25 years earlier in Houston. Bonnie's daughter, Terry Nettles, recalls when she was 14 years old, she and her mother would stand in their backyard, searching the skies for UFOs, hoping they would be transported.
It would be really neat if one would come and pick us up and take us away, because neither one of us really felt like we were part of this world, that we were always on the outside looking in. And we used to dream about that a lot. We wanted something different.
At the same time, in nearby Corpus Christi, Marshall Applewhite's perfect life began to unravel. His 16-year marriage dissolved, and his career as a college music professor ended when he was accused of a sexual relationship with a male student. Then Applewhite met Bonnie Lou Nettles, just as her 23-year marriage was ending as well.
They met in '72 at the theater I used to work at. He was teaching music and drama. It started out with my mom doing astrology charts for the mothers. And I remember her telling me, we were in the living room, that there was something about his chart, something there that was a lot different than somebody else's.
From the start, her relationship with Marshall Applewhite was based on a spiritual connection that shunned sex. They turned their New Age and Christian ideologies into a business and went searching for followers. While Nettles recited the Bible inside and out, Applewhite, also known as Herf, was the charming frontman. On New Year's Day, 1973, Applewhite and Nettles set out on what they called a spiritual road trip. Though Bonnie Nettles left her daughter and son behind with her ex-husband, she wrote to Terry regularly. After a year on the road, their unorthodox gospel began to take shape.
July 26, 1973. Dearest Terry, we have finally come out of the wilderness and know what our mission is. It is definitely a big one. In fact, we have been sent to fulfill the scriptures the same as Jesus and others came to do. This has been revealed in John's Revelations. I am not kidding, baby. This is for real. I knew it was something very important from the very beginning.
Along the way, they had financial difficulties, and Applewhite was arrested in Kansas for stealing a rental car. During his 6-month jail sentence, he fine-tuned his doctrine. Upon Applewhite's release, he and Nettles contacted UFO researcher Hayden Hughes in hope of spreading their message.
Herf Applewhite said, Hayden, you could do our mission a tremendous service by whatever means you have available to you, by simply stating that there are two individuals here to show that death can be overcome like Jesus did 2,000 years ago. And they compared it much like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, that their life here would go through a metamorphosis into a level above humans.
They called their group Human Individual Metamorphosis. By the fall of 1975, Applewhite and Nettles gave themselves names like Bo and Peep, Guinea and Pig, or Do and T, notes in the musical scale. They also referred to themselves as the Two, based on the two witnesses in the book of Revelations who were slain and then ascended into heaven. At their recruitment meetings all across the country, they were extremely persuasive with their sci-fi pitch to potential members.
That was so intriguing to me, is what was it? What combination came together that compelled people literally to, as in the apostolic age, this was Peter and James and John and Matthew suddenly leaving their work and following the teacher. We had the same situation here. They simply said, come with us, and they did.
Applewhite even convinced people he could communicate telepathically through secret codes of thought.
He said, Mr. Hughes, if you ever need to get a hold of me, gave me a secret code, which was mentally praying to Bonnie and Herf with the Lord's Prayer. And then about 14, 15 months later, there was widespread publicity about some people that disappeared in Oregon after attending a UFO lecture. So I decided to use the code. Then the next morning received a telephone call, and when he said, you have now asked, I thought, well, maybe these people are, who they say they are.
Human Individual Metamorphosis attracted a number of veterans of the fading hippie counterculture.
Most of the members had been involved in other religious endeavors. Est, transcendental meditation, tarot cards, astrology. They were religious seekers for the most part.
In order to keep the business going, members sold blood at blood banks and asked for contributions from Christian bookstores. Some wealthy members gave their trust funds to the group. One of the early recruits was 19-year-old David Moore, to the utter amazement of his mother, Nancy Brown.
When David came to say goodbye, I was observing him very closely to see if he showed any signs of being, a little off balance, or being, kind of wild-eyed or not making sense. But he seemed very calm, and he told me that this was something that spoke to him in a way that nothing that he had come across before had.
Applewhite and Nettles hated the attention of reporters, whom they believed asked annoying questions about Applewhite's past and the cult's financial situation. In 1976, the group went underground, living on campgrounds in so-called good energy states like Colorado, California, and Arizona.
So we isolated ourselves in this small group of 60 or 70 people, and we didn't have contact with our families. We were isolated into a circumstance where we could then focus on our change, and there was a continual emphasis on the urgency that we make our change over quickly, because we wanted to be ready when they came.
One woman said to us that when she bought toothpaste, she'd always buy a small tube because she'd expect to be leaving shortly. But then she said wistfully once, well, I'm always buying another tube.
As they anxiously awaited their exit, the group struggled to be like angels, denying their sexuality as well as their individuality.
Marshall Applewhite was promiscuous in his early life, and he saw sexuality as bad, giving him hard time. So he had to find a way to reckon with this.
Applewhite tried to exert strict control over the members of the group. At the same time, Nancy Brown began to publish a newsletter, creating a network for the shunned families.
One of the group members visited his mother, who was in the network, and saw this newsletter, and either took this newsletter with him or at least told T and Doe and the group about it. Well, apparently they were really startled and not pleasantly pleased.
They looked at her as kind of like a meddler, somebody that was just making trouble. And the way Marshall Applewhite thought was she was an agent of the lower forces. And it's kind of humorous looking back at it now, but at the time it was like a very serious thing, because there was this feeling that we'd get from Marshall Applewhite that somebody was out to get us. Somebody was going to take us down, take us off track, not allow us to complete our mission.
Sensing the newsletter might encourage parents to come after their children, Applewhite and Nettles reluctantly allowed members to contact their families. It was carefully controlled. Nancy Brown heard from her son David Moore through messages left on her answering machine.
Hello, this is your son David. If you want to know how you can help these parents who want to hear from someone on the trip, if you would print in your newsletter the names of those parents who will promise not to kidnap their family members or keep them from doing what they want to do, I'll promise you that most of these parents will hear from their loved ones pretty quickly. And I don't want you to worry about me, because there's really nothing to worry about.
By the early 80s, cracks were beginning to appear in the walls of the cult, which was now called Heaven's Gate. Many longtime members felt confused and quit. Terry Nettles started to sense her mother's doubts in her letters.
The letter in '82 that I got from my mom gave me the impression that I felt like she wanted out, or that she no longer believed it. It was something to the effect of, be sure and conform to society, follow all the rules. And I thought, why is she saying these things? This isn't what she would have said to me a few years ago.
In 1984, Bonnie Lou Nettles was diagnosed with brain cancer. Admitted into a hospital under an assumed name, she died alone in her native state of Texas. Applewhite never informed Bonnie's children of her illness or death until several months later.
She was only a few hours away from me, so nobody even bothered to call me to tell me that my mom was dying so that I could be there with her. Nothing. My entire insides felt like it had been ripped out, and I spent many nights waking up the next day with my pillows soaking wet because I would just cry through the night.
Though Marshall Applewhite carried on without his beloved Bonnie Nettles, Doe, as he was called, was shaken by T's death.
It put not just Doe to the test, but it put all of us to the test of our commitment to the next level. Do we think this is real, or do we think this is just a con game?
How could a messenger of God die and her body remain on Earth? Marshall Applewhite had to quickly revise his doctrine.
He or they needed to kind of account for what happened to her. They contemplated the idea that one could achieve this spiritual transcendence through some other means than just physically going there in UFOs, that suicide was an option.
At her work, because it's not the one that the old influences or the old vehicles, impulses would respond to. So frequently this is what we do.
To maintain his role as the supreme and all-knowing leader, Applewhite enforced strict regulations that would further squelch free choice.
Regimentation of daily life, measuring of food, rigid rules when they went out to the external world to work, not to interact with people. It was all to become more and more focused as if they were on a spacecraft leaving, and if you were out in the outer world, you were out of craft. If you were in the house doing routines, that was in craft.
Applewhite began to question the obedience of his members. In the past, he had distanced himself from other men in the group to avoid his homosexual urges. Now, he asked the men to join him in castration.
Marshall Applewhite was talking about how far would you go in order to attain your mission. And so he evidently was entertaining castrating himself, getting rid of the human need to reproduce, or that hormonal impulse to be attracted to the opposite sex, or to be attracted to any sex. I started going, whoa, I don't know, I can't really go for this.
Michael Conyers did not undergo the procedure, but Applewhite and 6 other men in the cult flew to Mexico City and were surgically castrated. In the early 90s, Marshall Applewhite used the internet to spread his gospel to the outside world. He began designing personal websites, calling the company a higher source. Eventually, they were earning nearly $400,000 a year. With this income, they recruited new members by placing a full-page ad in USA Today and other newspapers.
Doe got instruction to relate to the world again and go out and collect any of the so-called second wave, or anyone who was ready for this transition that didn't come aboard the first time around.
Now, everything was interpreted as a warning signal from above. At a campground in California, the cult thought the sky offered a message of impending doom.
The forest fires in the area had created this kind of blood red sky, and the sunset and the sun was bright red. So they interpreted that through a biblical passage that said the end times are near.
In March of 1997, the comet Hale-Bopp was nearing Earth's orbit for its first visit in 2,000 years. Applewhite prophesied a UFO was following in the tail of the comet. He said, "It's the marker we've been waiting for, the spacecraft from the level above human to take us home to the literal heavens."
I know that Doe and the class felt like that the comet itself was significant, that this was a next level's way of saying, okay, let's wrap it up here.
The Higher Source website posted a cryptic red alert message on the internet. The cult had sent letters and videotaped messages via FedEx to several old friends.
Let me say that our mission here at this time is about to come to a close in the next few days. We came from distant space and even what some might call somewhat of another dimension, and we're about to return from whence we came.
On March 26th, 39 bodies were found in Rancho Santa Fe, California.
You can follow us, but you cannot stay here and follow us. You would have to follow quickly by also leaving this world before the conclusion of our leaving this atmosphere in preparation for its recycling.
They had exited their vehicles in much the same way that they had entered them. I was so happy to hear that they were finally off this planet, that they finally got out of those vehicles. And I just wished that I was with them at that moment.
A friend of mine called me at work and told me, you know, it's just another cult. She says, no, you got to understand. She says, there's this guy named Father Doe, and there's a spaceship on that Hale-Bopp comet, and I totally lost it. You know, this has been part of your life, you know, and Herf has died with all the answers to the questions you've had.
When my phone rang, up till that point, I had left open every hope that David was involved because the media still didn't have the factual information that would confirm it. But as soon as I heard that first sentence, I knew all was lost.
6 weeks later, Heaven's Gate member Chuck Humphrey tried to take his life, but police managed to save him.
I wish that I was with them. It's not really a regret in the sense that, gee, I lost my chance at $1 million lotto because I lost the ticket or I didn't play today. It's more of a kicking myself for not having done enough of my own homework. As long as I'm still here, I can't do anything but share what I know about the next level and about Heaven's Gate.
What is it about human nature that causes some people to literally put their lives in the hands of another? 13-year member Michael Conyers recalls the first time he met Applewhite.
The energy that I felt from him put me into a state of almost fear and awe, because when somebody says and starts owning that he may be or kinda is a representative of the kingdom of heaven, there's kind of a energy that's exchanged between the two people. It's like there's a charge that goes on.
Hank Hanegraaff of the Christian Research Institute consults cult members and their families. He sees Heaven's Gate as the latest example of spiritual con men at work.
So often they follow a leader who is presenting them the skin of the truth stuffed with a deadly lie. I don't think that there's a more classic current case of that than Herf Applewhite. And when he told them that they had been impregnated with an alien spirit, and that's why his message resonated with them, they were immediately willing to follow the seductive siren call of the cult leader, and in this case, follow it right to their deaths.
The lure of Heaven's Gate was not just the security of belonging to a group. It was the promise of a UFO taking that group to a better world.
For people that have a particularly strong case of alienation, this can become a very powerful segment of your life. There is a vision of another kind of world in which we could live a lot better, and maybe the UFO can take us there.
Applewhite had led his followers here and there, changing their course as his own personal demons dictated. Finally, time ran out on him.
In the case of Heaven's Gate, originally the shift was to a waiting mode. We are waiting, and during this time of waiting, we will prepare ourselves. We'll purify ourselves. We'll cleanse ourselves. We'll make ourselves beings fit for the spaceship when it finally arrives. That's a dangerous mode because eventually you have to give up the waiting.
For Marshall Applewhite, the exotic comet gave him an opportunity to take his life. For his deluded and estranged followers, it was the end of their journey. A few miles from Rancho Santa Fe and the Heaven's Gate Mansion, the students of the Unarius Academy attend classes in past life therapy, interdimensional physics, and the psychology of consciousness. In 1954, Ernest and Ruth Norman founded Unarius in Glendale, California. Ruth prophesied that so-called Space Brothers were coming to Earth in the year 2001 to build a university where solutions to world problems would be discovered. After Ernest died, Ruth claimed that he told her to purchase land in nearby Hummel, California, which would be the UFO landing site.
They are coming to Earth and will land here. I bought this acreage for that purpose.
In 1994, when Ruth Norman died, 25-year member Charles Spiegel became director of the Unarius Academy. Back in 1949, he had a vision in a post office in Los Angeles that would change the course of his life.
I was walking through a dim-lit corridor to pick up some mail. Right in front of me, a picture appeared out of the so-called blue. Just like a TV picture opened up, and it was a life-size picture of a woman smiling down at me.
This experience prompted Spiegel to study metaphysics and Eastern philosophy. His research led him to a book written by Unarius Academy co-founder Ernest Norman. Norman wrote about past lives, psychic travel to other dimensions, and UFOs. Charles Spiegel contacted the Normans and asked for a meeting.
When the doorbell rang and the door opened, Ruth Norman stood there at the threshold, and she was the exact likeness of the vision that I had in the U.S. Post Office in 1949.
The Normans used their supposed clairvoyant powers to receive readings about Spiegel's past lives. Information, they said, came from the Space Brothers. They told him he had been Pontius Pilate, and they reenacted his life as the governor of Rome who had condemned Jesus of Nazareth to be crucified.
That was my first introduction to the reality of learning about one's other self or the existence in previous lifetimes. It's the same person. What one has done before is still a part of your persona.
Spiegel says over 20,000 members purchase books, visit the website, or the Southern California Center itself. One of his students, Marion Kemis, claims to have had her own vision before she came to Unarius.
We were out looking at the stars, just enjoying the night, and suddenly we looked behind us, and there, hovering on the ground next to us, was a UFO. It was the most incredible light show. It had all the colors of the rainbow, and they went around the perimeter of the craft, and they were all just like scintillating or dancing, just like vibrating. It was just incredible. It just hovered there and it was completely silent. And they've been coming around for a long time. I'm just lucky I've got to see them.
Marion Kemis interpreted the UFO sighting as a visit from friendly space brothers, the same ones from whom Ernest and Ruth Norman claimed to be receiving transmissions. Marion believes that Ernest Norman once mentally traveled to Mars and brought back important information about the red planet.
He psychically visited the planet Mars underground where the civilization of the Martians reside. A supernova came and they had warning of that. It was going to come and burn the top of their planet. It was totally burn them. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of Mars where you've seen kind of canals. Those are the underground huge tubes where the Martians are living.
The 19th century notion that there are so-called canals on the surface of Mars has been thoroughly and definitively debunked. But Unarians remain convinced. Like many UFO believers, the Unarians claim to have information which has been revealed to them alone. Through messages from the Space Brothers, Marion Keymis claims to have discovered information about a dark past which still haunts her.
In my last lifetime, I lived during World War II, and I was a French prostitute that I had taken up with a German officer just to protect my butt. The French resistance found out about me, and they threw me and all my belongings out in the street. And the mob that mobbed me and shaved my head there is the reason why I was so afraid of crowds now.
Another student, William Proctor, also experienced visions connecting him to World War II.
When I came into this life, I had leg problems. My mom would take me to the doctor over and over and over again. The doctor could never figure out why my legs hurt. But the picture that dropped into my consciousness, I had been shot down. I was an officer, a colonel, in the Luftwaffe Air Force. And I survived, but my legs were crushed in this crash. That's what was causing the pain.
Proctor found himself attracted to the UFO philosophy of Unarius.
I've always had an interest in UFOs. That isn't what brought me to Unarius. But I've always had the interest that there were life on other worlds. And as far as the Unarius Academy of Science, that opened the door for me. These, what we call Space Brothers, are human beings, and they're like us, except they're more advanced. And in the year 2001, we're going to meet these people.
Because of its UFO beliefs, the Unarius Academy received a great deal of publicity following the Heaven's Gate suicides in March 1997. Would Charles Spiegel, the director of Unarius, eventually lead his cult on a doomsday suicide mission?
That goes against the basic principles of physics, the physics of energy, you see. That's not what Unarius teaches, and that is to be responsible for yourself and for your actions.
We are normal. I mean, we go out, we live everyday lives, we work, we have good jobs. We don't cut ourselves off from our family and friends.
Taking one's life is a negative experience. Why would these people commit suicide over a so-called UFO following a comet? The only thing that was following that comet was those people's past, and it caught up with them.
Spiegel claims the Heaven's Gate suicides were a futile act that goes against all of the Unarius teachings.
When I was asked by the media at the time, what do you think of Marshall Applewhite and Heaven's Gate? And my remark was, they got off at the wrong exit, and they had a head-on collision.
The Unarians' main focus is on the year 2001. Co-founder Ruth Norman prophesied that the first spacecraft will land in the Bermuda Triangle, followed by 32 others in Hamol, California, on 68 acres of land high above the Unarius Academy of Science.
One of the brothers actually spoke to Ruth Norman, and he described that there would be 33 spacecraft of varying sizes that had been specially built that would land one on top of each other and lock in.
Welcome, welcome to the future landing site. These advanced teachers, 1,000 teachers per ship, have technology from their worlds that they want to share with us, problems such as economical, pollution, the ozone problem. They have the problems that we have on this planet. They have gone through every one of these problems, and they have advanced knowledge that will help us in resolving problems here that will be the future, positive future for the Earth world.
Hamol is also the site of an annual Unarius psychodrama called the Conclave of Light. In the performance, Unarians work through their supposed past life experiences. Many Unarians fear that this secluded location may become a battleground if hostile government troops attack the peaceful brothers from another world.
You know, are we, as in the past and in movies, going to get out all the armed forces and train our guns on them, chase them down, or have we advanced a little bit farther and are open to the fact that there is more intelligent life in the universe than ourselves?
There's going to be a tremendous, instantaneous global change. Now, I don't mean people are going to throw away all their material goods and want to climb on board. What I mean is they're going to have a totally different way of looking at life from then on, because the unanswered question, is there life out there? Is there intelligent life out there? Are we alone? Will finally be answered.
And that's why it is very important that this information starts to get out now, that man can prepare himself for a landing that is really our future.
Though the students appear certain of the Space Brothers' arrival, Charles Spiegel has prepared a response if the prediction doesn't come to pass. His answer is a convenient one. The world is simply not ready.
If the spaceships don't land, I'm not going to, have any great anxiety and go in a dither. There'll be a reason for it. You see, everything comes down to it. There's logic and reason in life. There's great organization in the cosmos. Because we're disorganized and have, you might say, gotten off the highway, that doesn't mean that the highway doesn't exist. You didn't pay attention to the traffic signals.
Research suggests that 20% of Americans believe in UFOs. Is this why some of these people are joining UFO cults instead of mainstream religions?
People are looking for God in all the wrong places. People are spiritually hungry, and they feel like Christianity has failed them. So we've replaced God's enduring word with a UFO or an extraterrestrial that's going to tell us what a new paradigm of truth is. And if you look, for example, at the Unarius Academy, what is the new construct of truth? You'll find whole civilizations, they have mastered their life. All too many people have uncritically bought into the story, not because the evidence is there, but they want to believe it's true.
Some experts do see differences between the Unarians and other UFO cults.
When you first look at Unarius, you wonder, why would people stay? It's just a little UFO thing. But there's a very substantial theology that basically draw from traditional occult and Eastern theology that it really holds people.
All of this is trying to recover a sense of cosmic connectedness rather than of alienation, that the idea that we humans are some kind of oddball that's stuck here in the midst of a inert cosmos.
We're going to have an apocalyptic event. We're going to have a convergence of spacecraft from various galaxies around the universe, and they're going to bring us some new esoteric revelation. And through that, we're going to have a utopian society where everything is pristine and perfect. And of course, as P.T. Barnum said, there's a sucker born every minute.
What are those? Next, a retired Methodist minister also celebrates UFOs and claims biblical proof of their existence. Like the Unarians, he sees magnificent changes in the future for mankind.
The Space Brothers were a no-show in 2001. Unarius students believe that the landing will happen when the majority of Earth's people become open to the idea of contact with interplanetary beings.
In the mountains of Sedona, Arizona, Milton Notdurft, an 85-year-old retired Methodist pastor, embraces traditional Christian beliefs, as well as ideas shared by many UFO cults. Reverend Notdurft's awakening came when he saw what he believed were UFOs in the skies just outside New York City.
We saw a UFO, well, it looked like a
radio tower or something. So I paid no attention, drove right on by. About 3-4 miles down the road, there was another one. There were finally 4 of them, blinking green and orange and red and white. And I thought, well, they must be putting on a show for me. So that was my introduction physically.
Though Reverend Notdurft believes in UFOs, he found mainstream clergy and churchgoers don't share his views. He discovered this when he talked about his UFO experiences with his congregation.
I don't talk about them in sermons. I did once, and that was a mistake, because I thought this was going to change the world in a week or two. It didn't. No matter how interesting or frightening they may be, things change slowly.
After the UFO sighting, Reverend Notdurft began a spiritual search for clues that might acknowledge the existence of what he witnessed. He believes the Bible has many passages which document extraterrestrial life. Notdurft cites the Star of Bethlehem, which led the wise men to Jesus of Nazareth.
And the Bible tells us that the star that they had seen went before them until it came and stood over the place where the young child was. Comets don't act like that. Planets don't act like that. Asteroids don't act like that. It has to be something else.
Milton Notdurft is also a believer in reincarnation. This age-old belief is shared by some Buddhists, Hindus, Native Americans, and many UFO cults. Notdurft claims reincarnation explains many of life's mysteries.
That was not a part of my Christian belief at all. People say, I don't want to go through this life again. I've had enough of it. That isn't the point. It isn't this life you're going through again. It's a new one that is going to teach you some different things than the last one did.
Notdurft predicts that a shift in planets will bring changes with the new millennium. The acceptance of UFOs would mean a new way of life on Earth.
The first thing that will be affected is economics. If we can get free energy for all time to come, what will happen to your electric stock? Secondly is religion. And if you think religion hasn't separated us, just think of the thousands of denominations and cults that there are in the world. So obviously something's wrong with our ideas of religion.
Has mainstream religion ever acknowledged the possibility of UFOs?
So I would say from a Christian standpoint that the Bible doesn't preclude the possibility of UFOs. Science doesn't preclude the possibility of UFOs. I would just say that there's no real, tangible evidence for them. So I think that many people believe what they believe because they want to believe it.
UFOs reflect a deep human need to connect with the heavens, a spiritual quest expressed in ancient text, Greek mythology, and now in modern science fiction.
I think that one can understand UFOs religiously in the term that Carl Jung, the great psychologist, used, that they function as technological angels in a technological society. So what this is saying is that the same kind of entities that we might once have thought of as like angels, gods, and so on coming down from heaven in a supernatural way now come in spaceships.
Throughout history, man has looked to space and the stars for answers. Could it be that the heavens offer an order and harmony that our unstable world lacks?
We associate that which is in the heavens with ultimate meanings in life or powers over us and this sort of thing. So something like a bright comet, like Comet Hale-Bopp, it just seems to be human nature that we try to make it more than a 25-mile across rock that's throwing out a 15-million-mile tail that's very beautiful and gorgeous in itself, but we want to try to make more than that.
All of us, we look up at the stars at night. The very building blocks of who we are came from the stars. We may have this nostalgia for the stars on one level of consciousness because we know we did literally come from the stars. And all cultures through all time have looked at the stars and felt that either the stars were benevolent beings or they were angels. It is part of the human transcendental experience to look up at the sky and to feel that oneness with the universe. And most of the groups, in my opinion, UFO groups, are doing exactly that. They are experiencing a sense of oneness with the cosmos.
As UFO cults look to the stars for a spiritual connection with the cosmos, the question remains, is there life out there, and will we ever make contact?
Oh my God, I know that's a plane. Jesus, please be a plane.
What the hell was that? Midway across the Pacific with circular.
How yards away? I could have hit it with a brick.
History, the first time we're studying something that's studying us.
Something fired a beam of light, doing a circle, you can imagine, circling our warhead. Fired another warhead.